Hello everyone, this is Sam from Greener Side of Sam, and I'm sorry if my voice sounds like a whisper. You might have to turn up your volume a little bit. It's the middle of the night, but I guess that's fitting for this story analysis tonight. The Telltale Heart was published in January of 1843. Edgar Allan Poe was around 34 at the time, which, in my opinion, is an understandable age to write a story like this one. Age, you say? How could this tie into the story? I will get to that point later. Maybe this story is about guilt. That seems to be the easy answer. It was the one I gave while I was in high school. What other layers could there be to the story of a madman admitting to a murder? Let's dive in. True. Nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been, and am, but why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. What was this disease that sharpened his senses? Was it guilt or something else? For many years I thought this story was about guilt, and maybe it was on the surface level. What is interesting, though, is the introduction of the old man. Now, he doesn't say who this old man is, and even though this story is fiction, Poe did have a stepfather who he did not have a good relationship with. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Let's look at that first sentence. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Where does guilt come from? Guilt comes from a reflection of the offense committed. We could stop there, but when I was reading this, a thought occurred to me. What must come before guilt? Judgment. An action occurs. That action is judged as offensive, and then guilt settles in. Judgment reveals the guilt. But where does that judgment come from? I think we can trace guilt to a specific point. But can we trace judgment if it has been with us since the beginning of time, always observing as a pale blue eye with film over it? Maybe the first idea that had entered his brain was that this eye was always watching him, not that he wanted to kill the man. He wanted to kill the man to kill the judgment. Because of this toxic dynamic Poe had with his stepfather, it leads me to believe that maybe he had this aching feeling of ridding the judgment of his stepfather. And how true is this in human nature as we go through our 20s, 30s, 40s, and so on, trying to rid the judgment of past generations? Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Mad men know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation. I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it. "You should have seen me." The "me" is italicized, making me wonder if his voice had changed to where he was talking to the ghost of the old man, saying, "You should have seen me," and then proceeded to say that he was kind to the old man, and in the next few paragraphs speaks of how he was so precise and careful, almost as if to say, "Yes, I was striving to be the perfect human. How could I possibly be mad?" There's almost a yearning and over-explaining to feel acceptance, to believe his own perfection. Listen to this. "Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity." I think it's that word. Sagacity. I should scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. In the next part, he talks about being in the darkness. "His room was as black as pitch with a thick darkness, for the shutters were close, fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. If there is nothing we can sense, then is there anything to judge? Is it in the moments of darkness that the madman is safe from the judgment?" And as a quick side note, I just thought of how many of us stayed up late as teenagers after our parents went to bed because it was a time where we were free from judgment and could think for ourselves. And I want to be clear, I'm not focusing just on the old man. The old man could represent a lot of people, parents, authority figures, teachers, but I'm really focusing on the pale blue eye representing this kind of judgment that is passed down and internalized in ourselves. And I'll explain this in a bit. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctiveness, in it all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones, but I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon the damned spot. So he's really not seeing the person, but the judgment that overshadows them. And the way I looked at the beating of the old man's heart was like the essence of that judgment. And I think there's a reason why the madman kept hearing it beat, because the judgment was still there, even though the person was killed. Reading on, I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. When we go off on our own, how many times do we say to ourselves, "I'm going to do things differently than my parents did. I'm going to change this world. I'm going to be a better teacher." And we try and kill off that judgment that we were given so that we can become our own person. But you see how even after the old man is dead, the madman's actions are still trying to prove something. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs to the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. What is he trying to prove if the old man's judgment is dead and boarded up securely for good measure? But the noise steadily increased. Of course it increased. Even though the old man is dead, the essence of the judgment is still there. It has carried on with the madman, and he cannot escape it. That is what I think is driving him mad. Not the guilt, but the fact that he cannot escape this judgment of the old man. The old man still lives on through the madman, and it's like he finally admits this at the end when he says, "Villains," I shrieked, "dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart." This old man becomes someone to be resented with his hideous heart. And now, even though the eye isn't there, the judgment is still there, but in a different form that is inescapable once that sound is observed. Did the judgment stay with Poe after his stepfather's death? Perhaps the true fear here is not the guilt, but rather, maybe we can never really be who we wish, but will always carry the judgment of others with us. Judgments that will affect how we observe and judge ourselves and then others. It is a continuous spiral that never seems to stop.